Good evening and welcome everyone to another Spiritual Science Loft Talk here with spiritual science as social activism and self-initiation. Taking on the interesting subject tonight called Understanding Evil, Spiritual Possession, and the Fallen Spirit Realm. Yes, juicy indeed. So, to begin with, is any of this real? Is any of this real? Let's talk about spiritual possession. Is that actually a fact of existence? Is it something that fits with the modern medical model? If you were to go to CAMH across the street, would they be including that as part of their way of looking at you, the diagnosis? Is it part of the DSM? That, oh yes, tick that box off, this person is spiritually possessed. So we have a way to deal with that. I think not. Then there is the other realm of society. We have scientism, medical model on one end, and on the other end we have New Ageism, which has their own view of these things, often similar to the medical model in that they treat it with kind of quick fix way, dealing with spiritual possession, or to put a bandage on it. That's often what's done in the medical establishment, is covering up the symptoms through medication and so forth. So the symptoms disappear and so the problem's gone away. But has it really? In fact, one might question what happens to that person at the time that they cross the threshold of death, if they have masked these symptoms of spiritual possession during their lifetime and have not found the means to deal with that. And then of course there's Hollywood, and how Hollywood handles this whole thing around evil and spirit possession and fallen angels and things like that, and how that's something of a disservice to us as well, portraying it often in very sensationalistic ways, really just to scare the dollars out of our pockets. And it works. People love a good horror film. But unfortunately, none of these things really seem to serve us in giving us a proper understanding of the situation and how to deal with it, which is what I hope to do tonight. It's an immense subject, but I do hope to be able to approach it intelligently, logically, with some spiritual insight, drawing from what I consider some credible teaching sources, and to shed some light on this. And my own interest in this actually goes back quite a long ways to my early 20s, when I did a 4-year spiritual warrior training. 4-year training down in the States. Spiritual warrior training, 2 years in residence, 2 years on the field. And much of what they taught and awakened within us is an awareness of the spiritual realms and what is going on there. And many of the classes that I took were training on how to deal with these adversarial or oppositional forces that exist in the larger reality of things beyond the senses realm. And to begin with, we need to lay down a few concepts. And an important one is to understand that the human experience and the human nature is something of a hub. We really do stand at the center as a hub of many different beingness, forms of beingness. We can see that here with our senses in the 3D realm, that we're connected to the animal kingdom, we're connected to the plant kingdom, we're connected to the mineral kingdom. We're connected to those things that in a way are below us, but we're also connected to things that are above us, things that are on what could be considered higher dimensions. We're connected to things of the past, we're connected to things of the future. And all these connections in our multifacetedness, it's all really about supporting and nurturing the whole. That all these connections are about supporting and nurturing the growing oneness of it all. So it's important to get that concept straight, that the human, in our budding consciousness, we stand at the hub in our multifacetedness, and we're connected to a lot of different things. We see how plants, they feed off the earth. We see how animals feed off plants in the earth and other animals. And we see how humans feed off of animals and plants and the earth. So there's this real connection of support and nurturing that's very evident to us in the senses realm. But humans as a hub are also meant to feed the spiritual world, other dimensions, which is kind of a new concept for some people. But that is part of our role, is that through our activity, through our inner life and outer life activity, we are in a position to feed and nourish other beings and other dimensions, including the so-called dead. And some of you were here a few weeks ago when we had an evening on our connection with the so-called dead. And we did some ritual and activity and some reading that is a way to feed and serve those that have crossed the threshold of death, but are still connected to us. They're still part of the family, they're still part of the team, and we will connect again with them in a very direct way. But right now, we can maintain an indirect connection and support and feed them in their ongoing evolution beyond this threshold of death. And in fact, you could think of it that our experience during the day, we come into the physical realm, and with our experiences, we scoop up experience in the senses realm. And then at night, when we go to sleep and we leave our body and go into other dimensions, we take with us some sustenance that can feed and nourish the so-called dead and other beings on other levels of the hierarchy. As a matter of fact, in some esoteric views, the human is considered the religion of higher beings. We are their religion. And they look to us in our activity as something that provides them information for growth. So it's a very interesting concept to realize that we are at the hub of something, and it's built in to the architecture of things that we do feed other beings. And that is good. So where it gets tricky is when we're not awake to that fact. We're not awake to that fact, and we get out of alignment with that fact, and beings come in and continue to feed off us, but not in the right kind of way. It becomes a parasitic thing. It's not so much a symbiotic relationship, but a parasitic relationship, because we're not really stepping up with consciousness and fulfilling the role as human beings. Speaking of food, somebody brought some more sustenance to keep us fed. So, where the problem really lies is in this central thing called freedom. Freedom of will. Because that is the name of the game. That is really the purpose of all existence, is that the universe is birthing beings that are self-aware and can exercise freedom of will as a self-directed being. all beings are really on that path, even including the animals, the plants, the minerals, and the beings above us. But freedom of will is a slippery slope. We know what happens when people are given freedom. You give a dog a lot of leash, and the dog will make use of it. The dog may take off and abuse its freedom. And it really brings into question, what is freedom? Is freedom just to go wherever you want, when you want, do what you want? Is that really freedom as some people in our current liberal society views it? You just do what you want, just rebel if you want, so forth. This is where the problems have come in, because there are other beings, as I said, that are evolving this capacity of freedom of will, who have abused it. They've abused it, and they have fallen off track, and so you could consider them fallen beings, sometimes referred to as fallen angels. And angels is a rather generic term, which can refer to actually a whole host of different beings, rankings of beings above us. There's really, in some esoteric schools, there's the angels, the archangels, the archai, the exousia, the dynamis, the kyriatides, the thrones, the cherubims, the seraphims. A ranking of 9 hierarchies above the human, of which we're the 10th. And we're all working together on these different levels of existence to try and evolve ourselves as these free will beings. So, if we're not using our freedom of will in a healthy way, other things will come in and take hold of our will. And I've left up here the schematic from the spiritual boot camp that's running right now that shows how the human has this threefold nature, made up of a will, made up of feelings, and made up of a thinking capacity. Thinking, feeling, and will. And the deepest part of this soul activity, you could say, is the will. It's the part of us we're not necessarily so awake to. We have our thinking. We're very much in touch with our thinking for the most part, because our thinking is attached to our senses, and we see something and we have a thought, and then maybe we have a feeling around it, feelings that are a bit more dreamy. But what goes on in the will is really quite mysterious. Not all of us really know what sits within our will, what intentions, what is carried there, and often we unconsciously act out of the will without really directing our own will. And so other beings will take advantage of that. They will take a hold of the will, or inhabit it, you could say, which we call possession. They possess our will. To be possessed is to have something else running your will that you may or may not be conscious of. It may be something that you're semi-conscious of. It's like, oh, why did I do that? Or why do I feel that way? Or why am I having, this kind of impulse? And we're not necessarily identifying the source of it. Well, it may be something that's attached itself to us in a parasitic kind of way, and it's feeding off of the contents of our soul. It's feeding off of our feelings, it's feeding off of the thoughts, and so forth. And that I like to refer to as zombieism. I looked up the definition of zombie. There's 3 definitions. First one is a willless and speechless human. Willless and speechless human, so-called walking dead. Second definition, automaton. Someone who's doing something just automatically. The will is just operating automatically without any check and balance from the feeling realm or the thinking realm. Because for all intents and purposes, they're dead. But their will is in autopilot. And then the third definition is a tall mixed drink made of several kinds of rum, liqueur, and fruit juice. So, if you have a craving to be a zombie or have a zombie, just go to a local bar and ask for a zombie. So, this whole thing of freedom of will implies choice, right? If you're going to exercise freedom of will, it means you have freedom of choice. You can make choices. And in making choices, they can be either good choices or bad choices. It could be right for you or it could be wrong for you. And that's another important concept, that there are choices we can make that don't necessarily get our will to align with spiritual source. And so we get out of alignment. And in the old mysteries, that was referred to as sin. The sin. And the word sin literally means to miss the mark. The original word for sin was also referred to someone missing the target. It's not a popular word these days. And neither is the concept popular. As a matter of fact, in a lot of the new ageism that's out there, people have gotten rid of the idea of right and wrong, or good and bad. Matter of fact, I was reading recently something by a supposed spiritual teacher, Neil Donald Walsh, in his books Conversations with God, where supposedly God tells him there is no good or bad. There is no right or wrong. There's no mistakes. Well, it sounds kind of nice, especially if you just want to be free and do whatever you want to do. It's nice to know you can't make a mistake, there's no right or wrong choices, and there's no good or bad. But we have to think about that. We have to think about that logically. If someone were to rape your dead grandma, was that a good choice? How does that feel? Is that coming from a good place? Yes, when we start to look at it, it doesn't seem like such a great teaching after all. And you kind of wonder whether that did come from God. Did God really tell Neil Donald Walsh that there's no right or wrong? Well, another concept we have to realize is there are false spiritual teachings. There are definitely false spiritual teachings. That's part of the landscape we live in, is that we're exposed to a myriad of teachings, and we have to figure out for ourselves, through our own freedom of will, what aligns and what doesn't align. And it's a bit of a minefield out there, because there's a lot of people who want to be a spiritual teacher, and they're very excited, to share the truth and to heal and to contribute good. But there's a lot of traps. There's a lot of things that sound good but aren't necessarily coming from source. They're not necessarily true, and they're not necessarily coming out of a conversation with God. Matter of fact, I'm wondering if Neil Donald Walsh should maybe be given the False Teacher Award for that one, especially the fact that it's not only his opinion, but he's saying this is God's view. Like, that's pretty big when someone is saying, God told me this, and God told me to tell you this. We're starting to get a look at how these dark forces work in dealing with half-truths and things that sound good and things that appeal to a certain part of the human soul. But if you follow through, you're going to find the floor falling out on you. And unfortunately, there's a lot of modern spiritual teachers, very sincere, but they're kind of dealing in dumbed down ideas on spirituality and karma and so forth, and I call it pseudo Buddha babble.
That's right.
Pseudo Buddha babble, where they take things that sound ancient and mystic and they repackage it in a way, and it all sounds very liberating and helps you to free yourself from shame and striving and things like that. But in the end, it can lead people further away from where they're going, because it's a maze. It is a maze out there, a spiritual maze. And what's really needed is to experientially expand our consciousness. That's the path that we need to follow, not an intellectual path where we're dealing with intellectual ideas from the mental plane, but we have to go beyond the intellect to cross this threshold. I put this threshold in the middle that runs through the middle of the soul. It runs through the middle of your heart. And part of your heart lives in the senses realm and enjoys the senses realm, or maybe it's terrified by the senses realm. And part of your heart lives on the other side of this threshold, where it can also be terrifying, because it really is the realm of mystery. It's the realm of the will, which connects us to the spiritual world. And one of the goals of our spiritual work is to move this threshold, to expand the limits of consciousness, to embrace more of what exists in the depths of our being, the depths of our soul, and eventually to be initiated into a spiritual seeing, where you see into the spiritual world. And I just feel a lot of these teachers these days have not necessarily gone through that kind of initiation to develop the capacities of spirit to see what lies beyond that threshold. Because when we go across the threshold, there can be beautiful things. You know, we have dreams. Dreams come from the other side of the threshold, and we see beautiful things. But we're also going to see horrific things, terrifying things. I know some of you have done entheogens, like ayahuasca, and you know what I'm talking about. There can be things that are not of this realm and are abhorrently disgusting and frightening and so forth. So there's a reason why that threshold is there. It is actually protecting our consciousness until we're properly initiated. And that's why a lot of the teachers today, they deal really on an intellectual level rather than from an experientially expanded consciousness. But that is really the path of initiation that needs to take place. And part of the problem is a lot of this modern spiritual paths don't include a psychotherapeutic component. It includes meditation, it includes maybe chanting, maybe energy clearing, things like that, but they don't necessarily help the seeker to go and descend down into the depths, to go down into the abyss, face the dragon, face the demonic forces, go through a trial by fire, trial by air, trial by water, and be transfigured and come out with the boon of a transformed nature, and to be able to speak experientially. Which is why I often turn to teachers like Rudolf Steiner, who I believe was one of the more credible and experienced initiates of the past century, who, one of his books here, Good and Evil Spirits. So in his view, there is good and evil. There is good and evil at work in the world. And he speaks of their influence on humanity. And we're going to talk about that in a moment, the influence they have. But let me read a quote from him about what occurs when a wrong is done. Oh, he uses the word wrong. What occurs when a wrong is done? something is brought about in the spiritual world. It is only purely materialistic belief that a wrong can take place without anything taking place in the spiritual world. It produces quite definite processes there. Effects radiate from us, which, though invisible to a sense perception, can be clearly seen by spiritual sight. Spiritual processes radiating from one who has done wrong provide sustenance for certain spiritual beings present in the spiritual world. Such beings cannot approach humans all the time. They can only do so when radiations resulting from wrongful actions emanate from them.
Can you say that again?
Yes, such beings cannot approach humans all the time. They can only do so when radiations resulting from wrongful actions emanate from someone. It is the same as with a room. If it is quite clean, no flies will enter. But if food is left out or dirt, the flies come. Likewise, the moment a person radiates certain spiritual emanations resulting from wrongful action, he is surrounded by beings who feed on them.
Wow.
So, in other words, for these things to become parasitic to us and to attach or to become embedded in us, there has to be something complicit on our part. There has to be something complicit within our will that opens that door. And in Rudolf Steiner's words, it's from wrongful action. Now, what's wrongful action is, of course, the question. What's right and wrong? And we'll see if we can approach that a little bit here. But it's good to know that we create it so we can uncreate it. It's in our power. It's in our power what we attract and what we can repel. So let's talk a bit about these forces, sometimes referred to as demons or devil spirits, entities, and so forth. They're actually referred to in all religious traditions: Hinduism, Buddhism, the Judeo-Muslim, Christian tradition, all refer to them. The older nature religions, Bonpo from Tibet, and Shintoism, paganism. All of our ancestors have acknowledged that there are beings in the spiritual realm that are about us, and to some extent within us. Unfortunately, modern science has completely disregarded this and pretty much convinced people that, you know, what I'm talking about tonight is just hooky-pookyism. It's just, you know...
It's Buddha babble.
Buddha babble. Yes. But all of our ancestors had believed in spirits in the supersensible realm, and that to some degree there can be malicious beings that when they approach humans can have an ill effect, a disturbing effect, even leading to disease. And within these ancient cultures, they often had their shamans, their witch doctors, their healers, their herbalists, and so forth, who had the gift of sight. They could see these things. They could see these things in your energy field, in your subtle bodies. So this sort of knowledge has been carried in the spiritual and religious aspects of culture over the eons, now being disregarded by science, unfortunately. But now it's the role of spiritual science. It's the role of spiritual science to reawaken this knowing, this knowledge, and this capacity to see these things, so we can once again deal with them straightly and with consciousness. And all of this really is a test of our freedom of will. These things that we have to deal with is a test of our freedom of will and our seership. So delving a bit more into some of the knowledge around this that's brought to us through the legacies of religion. And I think of religion as kind of a legacy that we've inherited. And, you know, a lot of people say, well, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual. And that's great. But we can learn a lot from the ancient religions, the ancient paths. And let's talk about Lucifer.
Yay.
Yeah, yay, Lucifer.
My boy.
Why would you cheer for Lucifer? Well, first of all, Lucifer's not the devil.
Yep.
Okay? Lucifer's not the devil. Often that's confused. People confuse Lucifer with the devil. But that is not really, that's not accurate, and that's not doing him a service. We know from religious texts that Lucifer is of the archangelic rank. Lucifer means being of light. That was his function, that was his service, was to administer light as an archangelic being. And as a being that was developing his own free will, it was like he went a little too far. And having this power of light, he just became enamored in his own power. Ever happened to you? You become enamored with your own power, your own light. That's some of that Luciferic impulse that works through us. And so that's where this whole idea of Lucifer and evil came into being, is that it became abused. It became abused because the freedom of will of Lucifer was abused. Freedom of will can lead to rebellion. Right? We think freedom is like rebellion. Well, I don't want to go that way. I don't want to deal with that plan. I want to do it my way. And so that's basically what happened with the Luciferic rebellion, was the hubris, the inflation that can come with spiritual light, led him away, and he led with him other beings as well that thought, yay, I'm on with this path. It seems like free, we can do what we want. So what that created was a branching out of spiritual beings that still exist as part of the whole. You can kind of think of this as a tree that's branching out with all these evolving spiritual beings growing, that with this falling away of certain beings under the classification of Luciferic beings, they still exist kind of at the periphery over here, working upon humans. They've kind of set up camp at one of the poles in the duality of the universe, of the universal forces. Right? Let's just take a moment to look at that. We know the universe is active through duality, the working of poles, the working of opposites. And we see that, through the Taoist tradition. They speak of the yin and the yang, these opposite but complementary forces. But what is yin and yang? They're just words. But in reality, it's spiritual beingness or spiritual beings. And so in the current state of this dualistic dynamic that you and I are subject to as humans, this branching off of Luciferic beings are occupying a certain end of the pool, one end of the pool. And it's the light end. It's the light end. Luciferic influence upon humans is still experienced as light. The light of intelligence. The light of our intelligence and our enthusiasm and our desire for freedom through knowledge and so forth is still coming from that pole. And so that Luciferic force is working upon us, it's working in us. because we are microcosms in the macrocosms, right? We have our own dualistic nature, left, right, above, below, front, back, masculine, feminine, right? So we are dualistic beings, and so we incorporate some of that Luciferic impulse within us. And it's only evil, it only produces evil when it's out of balance, when we're not aligned with what would be our truth. Because this Luciferic force still exists with what you could call the inflation, the expanded side of things, the light, the expansion. And if a human were to follow that, they would be seduced into their own overexpanded state. And when that happens to the ego, you fall into your own hubris. You fall into your own inflated state, which happened to me when I began my seeking. When I turned 20, I had a rather major awakening for a variety of reasons, and a major opening, an expansion, and a connection to the light beyond this realm. And I followed that light and was actually seduced into an overexpanded state where I thought I was the second coming of the Christ. Yeah, it was kind of fun for a while, walking around when I was at going to university in Western Ontario, walking around thinking I was the second coming of Christ. It was, yeah, it kind of felt good. You know, I felt like somebody for the first time in my life, and really felt like somebody. I mean, if you're going to feel like somebody, you might as well feel like you're the second coming of Christ. Feels pretty important. But that's going to the extreme that pole can take us to. And what actually happened was a Luciferic being jacked into my upper column, my higher chakras above my head, and was feeding me what's known as sugar venom. Sugar venom is like just sweet, tasty thoughts that you just keep drinking in, because it's like so blissful, so amazing. But it's a venom that is poisoning you and killing a part of you at the same time. Yes?
Can that include negative thoughts in the sense that they're not blissful, but they're comfortable because of their familiarity?
Whatever's going to work to keep you doped up and under their control. Yeah, because we get addicted to these things. Because knowledge, expansive knowledge, is like fantastic. Like that's what we want, and that's what the Luciferic pole gives us. And that's all good. That's all good. Like we're still working with that archangel as the part that's awakening our higher intelligence. So there's no point trying to like, get thee behind me, Satan, you know. It's about mediating it from the middle. And we'll talk about that. We're moving towards that slowly. But the extreme can be, you know, self-indulgent. Self-indulgence, where we're really just being pulled away from the earth. We're being pulled away from our responsibilities and our calling to be an earth being, because we just love to live in the reverie of meditation and psychedelics and whatever. You know, things that lift us up with levity are of the Luciferic domain and menu. Call it the menu. So too much levity. Too much levity is this drawing away of by the Luciferic forces. Now at the other pole, we got another category of beings known as the Ahrimanic beings. And this is the term that Rudolf Steiner uses to describe them. Ahriman is a term that was used in the Zoroastrian religion in ancient Persia, started by Zarathustra. And Ahriman was the counterpole to the god of light, Ahura Mazda. Ahura Mazda was the god of light, god of sun. And Ahriman was the god of darkness, the god of the earth and the underworld and so forth. And he was what you could call the devil. He was the devil within the Persian mythology, which then became known as Set. Set was the god of the underworld in the Egyptian mythology, and then Set got turned into the word Satan. We get the word Satan now more, the Egyptians and the Hebrews took that and called the devil Satan. And so what's on the Ahrimanic menu? The Ahrimanic forces are really the spiritual gravity that pulls us down too far into the earth, that brings us into everything that's material and has a complete denial of anything spiritual. Does that sound at all like the culture we're living in now? Yes, we're heavily dominated by Ahrimanic forces. It's been a gradual evolution of these Ahrimanic forces, because Ahriman, who is this, in a benevolent way, the force that gives us awareness and know-how to work with the earth, to develop the inventions and the technology to work with matter and to transform it into something else. So we have him to thank for his presence and his beings working in and through us to inspire an evolution of technology that's given rise to so many magical, amazing things that we have as powers right now. But again, it can have an extreme at that pole, as I said, where there's a complete denial of anything spiritual, that everything is just physical and that's all there is. Modern scientism, I call it scientism, really views life and the universe and everything in it as mechanistic. It's just mechanistic, it's just running on patterns, everything's just numbers. And that deception and illusion has really reached the zenith at this point in time. We're really facing a major Ahrimanic confrontation, where, to the point that people are looking to the hope that they will become transhumanistic. That is to say that we will merge with machines, we'll eventually be able to download ourselves into a computer chip, into a little USB drive, plug it in somewhere, and there you are. Hey, Grandpa. Yeah, let me just change the color here on the screen. That's that's kind of the end game of this Ahrimanic deception, because the belief is that humans are just mechanistic. We're really just brains and coding and things like that. But you have the freedom to believe that. You've got freedom to believe that. And you got freedom to have erroneous thoughts. We all have erroneous thoughts. We have all sorts of thoughts and impulses that aren't aligned. And that's part and parcel of having this freedom. One of the big steps in the Ahrimanic influence was through the invention of electricity. Electricity is actually tapping into what Steiner calls sub-nature forces. Subnature forces. So when we're using electricity, we're actually connecting to subnature forces that are not necessarily beneficial or benevolent to humans, but there again, we're using their power for ourselves. For what? Hopefully developing ourselves, developing consciousness, and to someday go beyond that. But with this reliance on electricity and much of the technology that is powered by electricity, there's actually a weakening of the human will. The will is in danger of being majorly weakened by an over-reliance on these harmonic forces. And when the will is weakened, the ego is subverted. The human ego, like capital E ego. I know this word ego is maybe confusing, and there's teachers will say, get rid of your ego. But no, we're actually here to develop a strong, mature, wise, empowered free will ego. That is the self. And teachings that say get rid of the ego are also dangerous. I would say false teachings that are there to subvert the I am awareness within the human. It weakens the will and leads to this zombieism. The zombieism, which is really a possession, a vulnerability to being possessed by other beings that will step in when you're like the Walking Dead or a soulless corpse, or you've had too many of those tall alcoholic drinks. I'm going to be doing a talk in February that ties into this whole thing around technology and zombieism. It's called Technology as the Corpse of Light. Technology as the Corpse of Light and the Rise of Spiritualized Machines. So we've got these two poles. We've got the Luciferic pole, which is kind of that New Ageism meme. And then we've got the Harmonic pole, which is the scientism meme. And the name of the game is not to go to war against them. This is not, we're not really in a spiritual war. My training was as a spiritual warrior, but it was there that they began unpacking this idea about how we're actually athletes of the spirit. And that's really a great analogy to use, because when you're warring with something, you're trying to kill it. But you're not going to kill a spirit. You're not going to kill something that possesses you. It's more about training yourself as an athlete of the spirit, where you can work with these things. You can work with their powers and be empowered by them. So another way of putting that is that we want to use these forces rather than be used by them. We want to use them to emancipate ourselves through disciplining ourselves as athletes of the spirit, being able to exercise our spiritual powers. Some of our spiritual powers, I'll name 3 spiritual powers that come out of our spirit. First one is discerning of spirits. When you activate your spirit and its powers, you'll be able to discern spirits. You'll be able to identify the nature, the quality. You'll be able to name what it is that they carry. And if you can name it, you can tame it. So this discernment of spirits is one of the gifts of the spirit, you could say. Another one is what's called word of knowledge. You can receive a word of knowledge. You're given information about a situation. You walk into a situation, it's like something doesn't feel right. You're not sure what it is. You can receive a revelation, a word of knowledge that gives you the information about what's going on. That's maybe somebody in that room is possessed, or they're disturbed by a spirit, that there's something that's going to take place. He's given information about the future. And then the third gift of the Spirit is called Word of Wisdom. And Word of Wisdom goes with the other two gifts of the Spirit, where you're actually given direction on how to act in that situation. You may be told to administer healing to a person. You might be told, no, don't put your hands on that person. Don't administer healing. The time is not right. You're not the right person to do it, etc., etc. We have to have the wisdom to know how to act upon the knowledge we've received and what we're discerning in the spiritual realm. Yeah. So, how do we work with these? How do we work with these beings? Well, some of the knowledge from the past is helpful. Who here has heard of the jinn? The jinn. Yeah, that word comes to us from ancient Arabian knowledge, Arabian mythology and theology. It's spoken of in the Quran and other Islamic texts. The jinn are considered supernatural creatures, and an individual jinn is known as a jinni or a genie, right? The genie in the lamp. And so we get this word genie, and according to the Arabian theology, a genie is a spiritual being, but it's not purely spiritual. It actually has the capacity to come into physical form and interact physically with tactile things, such as people and objects. And these genies are like humans. They can be good, they can be evil or malevolent, or they can be morally neutral. They can stand in that middle place where they're not going one way or the other. It depends on the circumstances. It's depending on what is the environment they're in, whether that they would act evil or act in a beneficial way. But it said that the genies, are able to inspire humans, that they serve in inspiring humans, such as the genie in the lamp. And it's from there that we also get this word genius, that the genie is the source of genius, that it's something speaking to you from another level that's providing you with insight and information. So, adding to that, let's look at what Plato had to say. Plato spoke of the daimon. The daimon, we get the word demon from that. It was daimon in Latin and daimon in the Greek. Now we use the word demon. And it's important to understand the concept that humans are being interacted with all the time by other spiritual beings, including the so-called dead. That we are a hub. We're like that hub on your computer modem, right? That's receiving all this stuff from different places. And that there is this hierarchy of beings that are evolving ahead of us, the angelic ranks ahead of us. We're sometimes referred to as the gods, right? The gods are there guiding us and working with us. And we see them in, Roman mythology and Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, and so forth. And that these gods were considered deities that were working with and through humans. And in the past, the leaders of society were actually acting as channels or conduits for these different ranking beings known as the gods. The gods are speaking through us. We see that in Greek theater, wearing the mask was so that the gods could speak through the humans. Same with, gurus and teachers, that they were actually landing or being a conduit for higher beings that were speaking through them to teach the people. And it's these deities, these gods, that would bring about ideas and inventions. Any great invention, any great movement in culture, any great inspiration is really coming from a higher plane, from a higher being, through a human. We think, just humans figure this out themselves. And there is a certain amount of that takes place. You get an idea and then you unpack it. But where did the idea come from in the first place? It came from outside of you. It was inspired. And I like that word, invention. In and vent. It means wind blowing through. An invention is this wind blowing through. And wind is often code word for spirit. Right? So an invention is this inbreathing of a spiritual sourced idea, or an inspiration. 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 And an idea is received, and the inventor is the one who's breathing it in and then breathes it out into society. And so it's great to look at all the wonderful invention that has arisen over the ages and realize that's because of the partnership we have with these other beings, of which we are a hub, including our whole Cartesian scientific model that we have right now. René Descartes said that when he was a young soldier, one night an angelic being came to him and revealed to him the numeric basis of the universe. He was just in his in his early 20s, as a soldier traveling through Europe, and one night this spiritual being, an angel, came and infused him with this idea, and now we're living it. Or we're really living with this idea of how everything's mathematically based. But is it? He definitely was bringing in an inspiration from the Ahrimanic side of things, the Ahrimanic pole, that gives us ideas and perspective about the material realm. And yes, everything in the material realm can be mathematically quantified. So there is a mathematical basis. But that's just the one pole way of looking at it. Because, when you turn on your computer, which is all about math, numbers, it's just crunching numbers, computing all the time, you really don't care about the math. You're interested in the ideas, the color, and the images, and what that's going to do to your intelligence, to expand your intelligence. You're really more interested in the Luciferic stuff. You don't really care about the Ahrimanic. Lucifer is where the knowledge is. And that's why Rudolf Steiner, at one point in his life, he had a publication, a periodic publication he was putting out. And the title of this publication was called Lucifer Gnosis. How'd you like to publish a magazine called Lucifer Gnosis?
You get in trouble.
Yeah.
Lucifer does know us.
But he was making a point. He was setting things straight, that this Luciferic impulse from this archangel of light really is working upon us and in us to expand our intelligence, to fill us with light and the enthusiasm that comes from knowledge. So these beings, Plato referred to as daimons, that work through people to bring new knowledge. And they could be of the Luciferic category, or they could be of the Ahrimanic category. And there are other categories as well. But these, the Luciferic and the Ahrimanic, really occupy the extreme poles of the duality that we live with. And so the question is now how to deal with it when we become overpowered. How do we deal with these beings when we become overpowered by them? Because that can happen, and that's part of their function. If they can overpower the human in our attempt to develop free will, they will do it. So anybody notice my new acquisition? It's my Pink Floyd.
Man was in the way. I thought he got that a while.
Pink Floyd. The package said it'll change your consciousness and your subconsciousness with every sip. Okay. Take that.
LSD in there.
Rimmed with those.
It's got Freud with his pink John Lennon glasses.
Oh, nice.
Yes. I also wanted to show you this. I keep this around just to remind me about the reality that we live in. This juice, I had some out there. I don't know if you tried it. It's called Fresh and Pure.
It's neither.
That's its name, brand name, Fresh and Pure. 100% juice. Oh, and other ingredients. Yes. So what are the other ingredients in Fresh and Pure? You can read the fine print. You've got fruit juice from concentrate, which I'm told actually has sugar in it. Pineapple puree, concentrated apple and or pear, grape, which has sulfites, and pineapple juices, citric acid, natural flavors, and vitamin C. Fresh and pure.
Here
Yes.
as well with like with Subway's chicken, they label it as like made with 100% chicken. And it turns out that it's actually like 50-50 chicken and soy. And what they meant by the made with 100% chicken is that the chicken that they do use, which only comprises 50% of the recipe, is 100% chicken.
Yeah, it wasn't like
Wow.
part chicken, part tomato or something like that.
And
You
you
know,
know,
it's like-
chicken McNuggets, until they started advertising, they're made with chicken breast. Before they said that, they're made with 100% reconstituted chicken skin.
Ooh.
The meat itself was not meat.
Delicious. So at least it's the skin of a chicken breast.
Maybe the skin of a chicken's butt. You never know.
At least it's the skin of the chicken. Amen.
Well, if you ever see chicken balls on a menu, don't
go
buy
there.
them because I know chickens don't have balls. Like,
Damn.
yeah, it's the world we live
Chinese
in.
buffets.
You know, this is the world of illusion and trickery and deception, what the Hindus called Maya. And it's the Ahrimanic deception, it's the Luciferic light that will lead us astray. And this is what we have to deal with.
So are you saying that kind of deception is Luciferic or Ahrimanic?
Well, it can be a combination of both, because these beings actually, they do collude in what they produce. I mean, like I look at a smartphone and I go, wow, like it's total Ahrimanic ingenuity to produce that thing, but what comes off of it is so marvelously Luciferic. And so, which it is, sometimes you can't tell, but it still smells like illusion. And so this is where we have to wake up parts of ourself. That's kind of the name of the game and the gamification of things. But just to quickly address Quentin's question about human sacrifice in the past, one of the things that these beings like is devotion and worship. Particularly the Luciferic beings in their inflated rebellious state, as we know from the biblical text, that Lucifer wanted to be like the Most High God. And so that still resides within his nature, to be worshipped as the One. And back in earlier times, there was this ritual of making offerings, sacrifices, burnt offerings, and so forth, which I'm not going to comment on whether that was good or bad, but that's just the way it was in earlier cultures, because it's a major thing when you offer a death to a living God, and particularly with the human sacrifice, because the human ego, the growing ego, the I am self, really has blood as its medium in the physical body. The warmth of the blood in the physical body is the medium of the egoic self. And so making blood sacrifices, or human sacrifice, was pretty much the ultimate. And so to give that to a god, to a deity, was really showing your commitment and connection to that being, that it came right out of the blood of the people. And yeah, is that good enough? Can I?
You can. It's all right.
Yeah, these beings, they do want our devotion, and that's part of their and that's partly what leads into possession.
That's why everything's team sports, competition. That's all about devotion. It's all about instead
musicians.
of like using creativity like a dance, going out there and doing something like dance or something. They want to pit you against yourself and others.
This actually does tie in quite well, because it's a question of alignment, right? We're really talking about alignment with our own true self, with our own higher self. And so these beings are working kind of as team opposition, or some people call them team dark, to try and get us out of alignment, right? Just like in athletics, you want to knock the opponent off their feet. In wrestling, you want to get the opponent off their feet and down on the mat. You want to get them out of the verticality and down into horizontality. And that's a major thing, to go from being vertical to horizontal. Because our verticality is really a great gift, and it's a great expression of our humanness, and it's a great expression of our budding divinity to be in this. So these other beings, and their function as opposition, are trying to knock us out of alignment, off our feet, out of this capacity of verticality, which is to be a pillar between the cosmos and the earth. It's to be an antenna between the cosmos and the earth. And they don't want us, or they're testing us to see if we really are on the right foundation, or whether that we can be knocked off because we're on false foundations, we're on false knowledge, we're on false footing. And so they try to redirect our devotional forces, which are hardwired in us. In our higher astral nature, our desire is to feed off of the divine. We're God hungry, as I heard someone say. We're all really God hungry, and we want to feed off the divine, and that is in our nature to do that. But if they can redirect our devotional forces to something else, and there are different fronts, or different false fronts for our devotion. For one, to worship a Luciferic being, or to worship your technology, or to worship yourself, or to worship another human being, or to worship nature, or to worship culture. It's fine to have respect and reverence for these things, but they all can be used against us to put us out of alignment with our true vertical relationship with our higher self. So this is why evil is kind of a tricky thing, because nothing is necessarily evil within and of itself. It's just how we relate to it in relationship to the whole. So how we get possessed, how we get overcome by these spiritual beings, sometimes known as entities, attachments, fragments, is we come into resonance with them. It's about coming into resonance, coming into sympathetic resonance. And if you're, sacrificing your rabbit to some strange god, you're going to be coming into resonance with it, which means that it has power in you. And these beings are all around us and working through us from a realm that's much more fluid than this realm here, this three-dimensional material realm. Once we go beyond this, that dimensionality is much more fluid. And humans were much more in that fluid state in the past. You go back to Atlantis and pre-Atlantis, and science knows this, that the Earth was less dense than it is now. And human bodies were less dense. And so humans actually experienced this ocean of beingness, of spiritual beings that are all around. But they also had the clairvoyant capacity to see what was going on and to navigate that ocean of vibration safely. But right now we're in such a dense form and we don't have those clairvoyant capacities to the same degree that we don't really know what's going on around us spiritually and vibrationally, because we're so identified with this dense realm. But in fact, the upshot of that is that this dense realm and our dense body is something that actually protects us from becoming, coming into resonance with other beings. And this is good to know. This is like an important safeguard, is to know having a physical body helps you from just inadvertently coming into resonance with other beings in the fluid dimensions. And I certainly experienced that when I did ayahuasca down in Peru and did 10 drinks over 2 weeks. I was very thankful for my physical body. At the end of that, it was like, oh wow, I've got this as something to hold on to, because when you're under the influence of ayahuasca, you're really in that fluid dimension and things come and go and in you and take over and they're pulling your strings. But at the end of it, it's like, whoa, I come back into the resonance of my physical body. But that's becoming harder and harder for us to do. And a lot of people are experiencing problems where they're easily coming into resonance with things, even when they don't want to. And often people refer to themselves as empaths. Empaths are people that are, they take on other people's feelings and their thought forms. They can't go out because they go into resonance with things around them. I don't really refer to them as empaths. I think we all have the capacity for empathy. I think of people like that who have not initiated themselves and activated their spiritual organs and their subtle bodies in a correct way, in a healthy way, where they can still stay connected to the dense physical body while at the same time reaching out beyond their own field to sniff, to smell, to taste, and feel what's going on out there. They've lost their footing in their physical body, so everything they go out and hear and touch, they go into resonance with, and it's very disturbing, and they often have to just withdraw from society. But that's not really the ideal. So we have to look at things that undermine our ability to hold vibrational solidity or congruity, and that can happen through poor diet. We're not nurturing the physical body well, or we're not getting proper rest, or we're overexposed to technology and electromagnetic fields. Maybe we're sleeping or working on a ley line or an earth grid, and that can compromise our physical body and our etheric body and our astral body. Even listening to loud pounding music, think of it, some of the music in bars and dance places, where that pounding bass and other things, it's a lot of frequencies for the subtle bodies to mediate, and over time it can just wear them down and puncture holes in them. It can produce cracks and holes in the life force body, which there again makes you vulnerable and weakened, and then more susceptible to coming into resonance with a stronger vibration than your own. I think there's a lot of that happening today with overexposure to media. Just even the long hours we spend in front of computers with the vibration coming off the screen and so forth. We have to mediate that. We have to find ways to counteract these forces. Otherwise, we just come more and more into resonance with these other beings. And as I mentioned before, modern technology and things powered by electricity are really utilizing powers of sub-nature forces, which can be particularly harmful to the human field and the human spirit. Other ways we come into resonance or we become overpowered is through the suggestions and the ideas that are circulating around the world, circulating around in culture. Thought viruses. You hear something, you read something, you take in a thought that may sound really great, like you read Neil Donald Walsh's book, Conversations with God, that, you can't make a mistake, there's no wrong choices. And you like that, and you take that in, but then it's the whole thing around one rotten apple can spoil a whole bunch. That one thought is going to affect another thought, is going to affect another thought, and next thing you know, your mind becomes confused and clouded with these thoughts that aren't jiving together. They're contradicting each other, and that produces a state of cognitive dissonance, which is what these beings like. If your mind is a log jam, they're going to have much more access to you because you're confused and you're not discerning. You're not exercising discernment. And that's what these beings will do. They create trends and memes and things in fashion and culture that people feed off of, right? Because we're here to feed. We're here to feed and build ourselves out of what we feed upon. And a lot of these thought viruses, they get put out there through movies and magazines, and going on the internet is, the internet is a double-edged sword. It's definitely a collusion of Ahrimanic and Luciferic forces. You go out there and it's a pipeline of ideas, and you have to have discernment. And it's not only the ideas. When you click on a website, there's also an astral space that's connected with that. The astral space that's been created in that website. You're going to be resonating with that. You're going to be taking that into your own astral body. And I know you've all experienced this, how all the clickbait that's out there, right? This is how these beings work. They need you to be complicit with their agendas. So it's called bait and hook. They bait you with something, and then you go for the bait, then they've got a hook inside of you, and then they can lead you along. And there's all this clickbait out there on the internet where you see these sensationalistic headlines. Oh, that sounds really great. I want to see what that's all about. But a lot of it is just that. It's sensationalistic, it's overblown, it's inflated, it's Luciferic. And it's being driven by the fact that people, can monetize their websites and their YouTube channels and whatnot. And every time you click on their website, their YouTube channel, they're making money. So they're putting clickbait there to get you to, take the bait, and they hook you in, and next thing you know, you're going into resonance with the astral space that's in their website. And this is particularly dangerous with things like internet porn. Internet porn has to be the ultimate for all this, because you've got the harmonic forces of the technology that delivers high definition images right to your laptop, and that's the Luciferic side. It's like, oh, this is so delicious and beautiful and stirs up your soul. And then there's the sub-nature forces that are working through the electricity and whatnot. And then you're opening yourself sexually. You're opening your lower chakras, which, the lower chakras have lower vibrations than the upper chakras, and that's part of our protection too. They're connected more to the dense body. And so we open up our lower sacral chakras and start resonating with all the stuff coming through the internet porn and the people that created it and their astral spaces. It can really be severely debilitating and polluting of the human psyche. I'm not saying it's all bad. I don't want to sound prudish about it, but there are better ways to cultivate our sexual energies, and that's one of the reasons why Laura and I host the spiritual boot camp and help people to learn tantra and cultivating of the sexual energies themselves, with their partner, in group and so forth. So men aren't having to resort to internet porn, and women aren't having to resort to mechanical devices and all of that, and we can come together, body, soul, and spirit, and enjoy what we've got without having to overuse the devices of Ahriman and Lucifer. So possession can begin with obsession. They're kind of cousins. If you find that you're obsessed with something, which means you can't stop thinking about it, you can't let it go, or you feel that something won't let you go, or you feel that you're overly attached to something and your desires and your thoughts, that could be an attachment. That could be an attachment to you that's trying to feed vicariously through you. Because that's as I said in the very beginning, we're all supporting each other through nourishing each other. That's part of the architecture. That's part of the wiring. But there are beings that want to, for example, experience, human lust. Like, that must really give some beings a real jag to be able to tap in and parasitically feel the juice of human lust. And so if we feel obsessed with something, it could be borderline possession. It's something that is trying to get a foothold in us to feed itself in some vicarious way. And that may be experienced, obsession can be experienced through really two poles, that of pleasure and that of pressure, where we can't give up pleasure, like we just have to have it. We're obsessed with having this pleasure. It just overtakes us, overtakes our rationality and our good judgment of things. The other pole is pressure. Sometimes these beings will pressure us and pressure us and pressure us until we give, until we finally give in and do what we're being pressured to do. And in both cases, it gets us from not taking a stand spiritually. It's because we're not taking a stand spiritually. In the middle, being a strong pillar for ourselves and a strong pillar for the collective, and really working the vertical relationship between the cosmos and the earth, which is really our ultimate responsibility. We're here to bring cosmic consciousness into the earth. And so this pressuring and pleasuring gets us out of alignment. Another way is through half-truths. Half-truths that get put out there. I've mentioned this before. Things that sound good, that are full of light. They sound sacred and spiritual and profound, but often they're just half the truth. You know, like people often say, oh, well, you know, there is no such thing as time. It's just a man-made construct. Yeah, we just invented it. It's part of the patriarchy to control us. There's no time. You know, look out the universe, there's no time. But that's a half-truth, because we are time beings, and we do, part of us, experience linear time. Like a plant. A plant has its seed, its bud, its stalk, its leaf, its calyx, its blooming, and its seeding. It's a time organism, and so are humans. And in fact, the gods, spiritual beings, the hierarchy that's working with us, has given us time and space as something to mirror our development. It's something to work with. That's why every day we have to deal with time and space. So, yeah, when people say, oh, time doesn't exist. Well, yeah, when you're dead. When you're alive, it does exist. So, get with the program. To deal with this, we have to awaken this higher intelligence. This is what's going to help us to mediate between these poles, the Luciferic pole and the Aramonic pole, the upward levity and the downward gravity. In the middle, we have to develop this awakening of higher intelligence, and this comes with this awakening of uprightness. And we can see it's happening in time, you know, at the stages of human development, the Homo erectus, and then the Homo sapien, and then, as Samuel Sagan says, the next stage is Homo angelicus, where humans, you know, go beyond the human stage, which is not to join with machines, but actually go to the stage that angels are at right now. Because angels had a human stage, and now they're at an angel stage. We're at the human stage, and then we'll have an angel stage. It's progressive through time. Yes?
So with Homo angelicus, do you think that angels are trying to get from angelicus homo?
Well, they have one foot in the human world, but they're moving up
In their own ways.
in their own ways.
Interesting.
So it's interesting what Graham Hancock says about what what has helped perpetuate this awakening of intelligence that we've seen from the caveman, the Neanderthal. And one of the ideas is that the discovery of psychoactive substances brought about an acceleration of intelligence and subsequently invention, right? When caveman just started eating mushrooms or something, and then, whoa, third eye opened and connection beyond the dense gross realm and connecting with, the daimon, the genies that inspired invention, and then got the snowball of intelligence rolling. Or was it the Luciferic pull? Luciferic beings? Well, I think actually both. Because psychedelics are very much within the Luciferic realm. They're very much an extension of that light-filled realm. When you take psychedelics, lights go on beyond anything you see in this realm. So it is both psychedelics and the Luciferic influence that has helped in this development of higher intelligence. And we should be thankful for that. And that's been the role of the shaman and the witch doctor and the curandero, is to work with these substances. But it's a fine edged sword there between helping a human develop higher intelligence or falling prey to evil forces. And we know within the shamanistic culture of things, there can be a lot of bad that takes place, a lot of abuse of freedom of will, and a lot of abuse of these substances to overpower other human beings. That happens all too often, unfortunately, where the white magic goes black. And that's why there needs to be a lot of integrity when we're going to work with these powers. As we expand the threshold, we go beyond the threshold and we increase our willpower and engage with other spiritual forces. We need immense integrity, which is why Rudolf Steiner gives this 3-to-1 rule. For every one step you make in the development of power, you should make 3 steps in the development of your character and your integrity, and test and prove your ability to withstand temptation and seduction from things that are like so fantastically alluring, from illusion, delusion, bliss, sexual ecstasy in it all. We have to determine, who is the master, who's in the driver's seat. And so, just to talk a moment about psychedelics and working with them, with or without a shaman, that it's actually a form of controlled possession. It's a form of controlled possession where you invite a plant spirit intelligence to come in to you, to come in and become active within your subtle bodies, within your soul, within your spiritual nature. It's given the keys to the car. Like, you lie down, you sit there, you take this, and you just let it happen. You really are allowing something into your will that it possesses you, and the shaman hopefully is able to, with proficiency, guide this process through his Icaros, his singing, and his other magical methods, so that something positive happens, and at the end of it, the possession is over, the plant spirit is extracted, and you're back in your mind. But it should be known, as the title of this book, by Ron Dunselman, it's called In Place of the Self, How Drugs Work. And that they really do come in place of yourself. they displace the self for an amount of time where it's the self in you, working with your memories, working with your desires, working with past and so forth. And then when it's over, you know, you as the self come back in and you wake up and you're fully conscious. And it's all kind of like a dream that you had. Because something else was in there activating you. So it can be very powerful medicine that sometimes is used to actually counteract other forms of possession. People may have entity attachments and whatnot, and they take ayahuasca and whatnot, and it helps them to extract attachments and entities and fragments and so forth. But one has to be careful that one doesn't overuse it, because it does subvert the self. It is in place of the self, and if it's abused, then it can lead to openings to other forms of possession and things that are running the show, and your will is weakened, and the ego is not developing, and that's really what it's about. We're trying to develop a strong, capital E ego that's in control of its own will, feelings, and thinking. And I had this experience myself when I was battling something called Morgellons, and in a way I was infiltrated by a bacteria that also had a spiritual component. And when I took ayahuasca, I was able to see what was possessing me right down to the bacteriological level, the demonic force that was there. And when it happened, like as soon as the drink hit, it was there immediately, and it was trying to convince me that what I had was good and everybody else should have it. And my will was like, oh, okay, oh, wow, really? Like, yeah, this is actually good and everybody should have it.
Yeah.
Like, I was so overpowered in my will at that moment. It was a knife's edge between where I was out, the ayahuasca was in, the being behind Morgellons was there, and like I had to really pull myself in and say, you're the being behind Morgellons and you're a lying spirit. And it had to admit that I had named it and I had tamed it. But it was a knife's edge between using the ayahuasca, where you have to displace yourself, let the spirit intelligence in, and deal with whatever you have to deal with, and hopefully come out, on top. And it was in the balance there for a few moments.
I'm curious if you've had any knowledge of the Morgellons before the ayahuasca and how the Morgellons got into you.
Well, that's a long story, but yes, I did have knowledge of it before. Yeah, and I got it through a bug bite.
Wow. Sure.
But it's there's more to it than that. It was also improper use of technology, and I was complicit in some ways that allowed this thing to get a foothold within me. Yeah, as I said earlier, other ways that these beings get into us is through false spiritual teachers, false spiritual teachings, trading in half-truths. A lot of them bring old light from the old religions, the old mysteries, the classic paths, and they present it as if it's the light for today. But think about that logically. We're not living today by sunlight from 2,000, 4,000 years ago, so why would we live by spiritual light from 2,000 years ago? We've changed, the world has changed, and the spiritual environment around us has changed. But these beings will maintain the old paths. And they sound great, they sound very alluring. And this is something that the Luciferic element will deal in, is keeping these old paths alive as traps. Because
You can't.
you'll grow to a certain extent, but you will not grow to your full stature. You'll feel change, you might feel good, but you're not going to be able to rise up in your full verticality because they're not giving you the full sustenance that you need to grow from where you are today. And so I find that with, teachers like Deepak Chopra, who, he's an obviously intelligent person and very prolific. He was raised, in the Hindu tradition, and then, became a scientist, became a medical doctor. But I've heard him speak, and he dismisses the idea of demonic forces. He says, oh, it's just human ego. It's just the human ego, and you get rid of the human ego, you get rid of the problem. Well, that's very old school. That's very, ancient kind of Hindu, Buddhist teaching, get rid of the ego. Well, really, those teachings were good at that time to help diminish egoism, to prepare for the higher self to come in, so that the Luciferic inflation would not be able to overcome us. So he's kind of mouthing, old teachings and then dumbing them down, trying to integrate them with, a scientific model, the psychological model. It's like, oh, there is no evil, there's no demonic forces, it's just the human ego, and to get rid of that, we'll get rid of the problem. And he's very sincere when he says it, but we need to realize sincerity is no guarantee for truth. Just because somebody's sincere does not mean that what they're saying is true. We need spiritual discernment. I had another spiritual teacher here recently, someone I've known for a short while, and they are running their own spiritual school. And this person has all sorts of knowledge about all sorts of things, and he can talk about a lot of different things, and he's very interesting to talk with. Had interesting conversations with him. And he does a lot of work with substances, he does a lot of work with psychoactive substances, and he puts a lot of emphasis on them. Matter of fact, that's really where his schooling is taking people. He's introducing them to the shamanistic path, the shamanistic archetype, and has people doing mandala work. But he has told me that his end game, what's coming in the schooling that he's leading people through, and he doesn't tell them this at the beginning, but that it really is about working with psychoactive substances, and that he is to proclaim that Rudolf Steiner was all about entheogens, which is a complete lie. I've been studying Rudolf Steiner for over 30 years, and he's preparing to tell people that that is the way of Rudolf Steiner's modern path of initiation, and that was the way of the Rosicrucians, of which Steiner's work is out of the Rosicrucian stream of spirituality, and that it's through working with entheogens that a person is going to ultimately come to cosmic consciousness. Well, I know that quite well, that it's a lie, and I've been studying this book here, How to Know Higher Worlds by Rudolf Steiner, Modern Path of Initiation, and we're studying this in the Spiritual Boot Camp. And there's nothing about entheogens. As a matter of fact, he warns about working with shortcuts, and I know from other sources that he spoke specifically about how entheogens are not of the new mysteries. They're of the old mysteries. They're of the old ways. Furthermore, this supposed spiritual teacher is preparing to tell people that Carl Jung was in favor of using psychoactive substances, and that his red book, full of mandalas, were all inspired while he was under the influence of hallucinogens and so forth, which is also a crock of bullshit. it doesn't take much research to see that Carl Jung was not working with these things, and he was not in favor of using those things. Those things are valid in a certain way, just as anything that's a legacy from the past, the old mysteries, the old religions, the old spiritual schooling and tools have a place to a limited amount. But now, what we are doing in a modern path of initiation is to develop consciousness of the spiritual realm while fully awake and out of our own will and efforts, not by relying on plant spirit allies, not by relying on other things that we bring in to ourselves from outside, but things we can bring from the inside out in the cultivation of our nature, including the sexual forces, which is why Tantra is really a great path, because it is working with what's inherently within you and using that to propel your consciousness forward, not going under the influence of other beings. So this person I'm speaking, I'm not going to mention any names, but they're involved with Santo Daime, and they told me unequivocally that working with the Daime is the way to cosmic consciousness, which is sometimes referred to as the Christ consciousness, and that when the ayahuasca, which is used in Santo Daime, is turned into a sacrament, that is actually taking in the Christ, and that's the only way to do it. And I said, well, no, there's other ways to do it, like one does not have to take ayahuasca to experience the Christ cosmic consciousness. But this is his agenda, this is his plan, and this is what he's going to roll out with the next levels of his schooling. But it's a complete distortion of the truth, and anybody who's going to talk to me about what the Bible says needs to realize I devoted a lot of time studying the scriptures when I began my spiritual seeking, and Christ was not giving his disciples at the Last Supper, magic mushrooms or some sort of entheogenic substance. It says it was bread and wine, and he said, whenever you eat or drink, to think upon him as a representative of the higher nature. And that's how you will connect with that higher consciousness. It's not through a substance, it's through inner activity within your own soul that you can connect with the cosmic or the Christ consciousness. Not by taking in plant spirits.
Well, minerals are plant spirits too, and you do need those for Christ consciousness.
Well, yes, all these things do support from the ground up. There's no argument there. But the Christ also said, when two or more are gathered in my name, I am in the midst. It's actually in fellowship. It's in fellowship with one another is where that consciousness is going to exist. When we come into community, harmonious community, that's where it's going to live. Not by going on our, individual trips with things. The medicine has its place, but I was quite shocked when I heard this agenda of this teacher and his twisting of scriptures and how he claims that his father-in-law is the keeper of this secret knowledge about how Rudolf Steiner was really into entheogens. Nobody knows that, but his father-in-law knows that, and also that Jung was into this. So, as I spoke with this person and confronted some of these ideas, it really led to kind of a bizarre social experience where it was like crossing a demon. It was confronting a demon on its dogmas and doctrines that are half-truths and false, and to expose the spirit that was there, and became very inflated, became very infuriated, and became very insulting of me. And left in a heated rage. Last words, oh, and you can see why all the people fall asleep when you're teaching.
I'm sleeping right now.
Yes, who's sleeping? Okay. So that's probably the last conversation I'm going to have with that person in this lifetime. But I'm coming to that point in my life where I have to confront error. Otherwise, I'm complicit with it, and I go into resonance with it,
Yeah.
and it compromises my own vibrational congruity. So, yeah, I mean, the concept to understand is that there's the old mysteries and the new mysteries. And as I mentioned earlier, the thing of war, that's part of the old mysteries. Warring over things that, of this earth. You can see that in the old religions. It was about going out and conquering the enemy, claiming the land, anything that's really pertaining to the physical level, like the geographical or the ethnic or nationalism, racism, things like that. They're really of the old mysteries. It's old light that served humanity at that time. But it's erroneous now to interpret that as being applicable to our day and age. It's not about warring. It's about, as the Apostle Paul wrote, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and the rulers of this world, which he referred to as the prince of the power of the air. So it's much more now about being an athlete of the spirit, being able to take thoughts and ideas and energies coming at us and to be able to work with them with some sort of spiritual athletic prowess, and to counter these things. To work with things like our desire, our lower desires that are earth-directed, and to transmute these into higher desires. And the Greeks understood this. The Greeks had a marvelous culture where they understood that the arts were for us to work with to counteract this warring spirit that had been so strong in the past. So working with the arts are considered a great way to strengthen ourselves, to develop ourselves, and to overcome spiritual attachments. Because when you're working artistically, you're working transformationally. You're working with clay, or you're working with paint, or you're working with sound. And as you transform them, you're actually transforming yourself. You're strengthening yourself. And if you have a spiritual attachment, often you can work that out through that kind of activity. It takes activity, it takes will on your part to shed an old skin and let a new skin come through. And again, I'll quote from Paul, because the epistles of Paul really are speaking of the new mysteries. And he said, bring every thought captive, casting down faulty logic, and define your minds with spiritually aligned ideas. Do not conform to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. That is the key to power, is working with your mind. It's the most obvious thing that we've got, is our mind, and our thoughts, and our feelings and intentions. Be not conformed to this world. Don't go into resonance with the things of this world, the limited things of this world. We need to transform our mind. And he says, then you'll be able to test and prove the divine and everlasting will of God. So this renewing is really the action we need to do. It's a putting off of the old and putting on with the new. And we see that in the cycles of life. We see that in the plant world, in the seasons. There's the dying and a growing and a rebirth. We see that in the animal kingdom. We see it marvelously in the metamorphosis of a caterpillar into a butterfly. What an example of what's available. This is telling us as humans what we are to do. And we also see this in the life of Christ. When we talk about the cosmic consciousness, sometimes referred to as the Christ consciousness, that the Christ, whether you believe it's a real story or whether it's a metaphor or a myth, it doesn't really matter. It's a template that shows what can take place on the human level in terms of metamorphosis. And I refer to it as the Christ cycle, that we need to ride the Christ cycle where he was alive and then he died, and then there was this resurrection in a new nature, and then an ascension where he's able to return back to the cosmic consciousness. And that's kind of the template we need to be working with in our own inner life. There needs to be a dying away of the old nature, putting it off. We have to do it. We have to engage our own will in putting off that the chrysalis of the caterpillar so that the higher nature of the butterfly can emerge. And that's in our thought life, because that's really where the action is. The action is in the thought life. That's there from the time you wake up in the morning to the time you go to sleep at night. And our mind is to be a mirror. Our mind is a mirror. Our mind is reflecting things all the time, just as the brain is a mirror. The brain is really a mirror. People think that the brain is where activity is going on, but the brain is actually just a mirror of things going on other levels. And likewise, the mind is to be a mirror. And right now, our collective mind here on the earth is slowly becoming diseased. Our collective mind is slowly becoming diseased. The whole planet is becoming like a blighted plant. Why? Because our collective mind is just mirroring materialism. Our mind is just mirroring this material realm. And by nature, the things in the material realm, they corrupt and they die and they decay. And so no wonder when the World Health Organization says that depression on the planet is becoming the second most cause of death, but it's the second disease worldwide that needs to be treated, depression. It's because our collective mind is just mirroring materialism rather than renewing our mind to mirror spiritual things. Our mind can be a mirror to echo and reflect things from the spiritual realm. So that's kind of where I want to leave this off, is in looking at the contents of your mind and recognizing, what are the luciferic impulses of levity, cause expansion and excitement and warmth and enthusiasm, and what are the harmonic forces that pull you down, the gravity, that help you to keep a foot on earth, but can also trap you and put a ceiling and say there's nothing beyond the earth. And then in the middle, it's really all about the middle path, where we can develop the cosmic consciousness, the power to renew those thoughts, turn them into something of value that will help us evolve individually and also collectively. So thank you all for coming out tonight and investing your time in listening to these ideas.